Lucas Carter stood in the small, modest apartment in San Francisco, his hands still damp from washing the dinner dishes. The hum of the city outside the window, a constant reminder of the world beyond his small, quiet life, buzzed relentlessly in his ears. It was a familiar sound, one that had marked his existence for years as the head custodian at one of the city's most prestigious office buildings. For Lucas, his job was more than just work. It was his identity. Sure, it wasn't glamorous. It wasn't the kind of position you'd tell people at a dinner party. Mopping floors, scrubbing toilets, ensuring every corner sparkled. For the suits who worked in the tower above. It wasn't what people imagined when they thought of success. But for Lucas, it was honest work. Something he took pride in. It kept the lights on. It put food on the table. And most importantly, it gave him a quiet sense of dignity. It was enough. It was his life. Camila, his wife, had always been supportive. Or so Lucas thought. They had been together for years, married for a decade. And through all the highs and lows, he had never questioned their bond. She knew who he was. She knew the job he did and never seemed to mind. Until that night, she came home late, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. A sound that echoed in the silence of their apartment. Her face, usually soft with affection, was tight, almost as though she had been holding something in for far too long. Lucas could tell something was wrong, but he didn't press her. He never did. He simply waited, wiping his hands on a dish towel. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she spoke, and her words hit him like a punch to the gut. "Please don't come to my sister's wedding," she said, her voice low but firm. The words didn't make sense at first. Lucas frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" "Why?" she sighed, irritation evident in her tone, as if he were making the situation more difficult than it needed to be. "I don't want people to know you're just a cleaner." The sting of her words was instant. "Just a cleaner." The phrase cut through him, and his stomach sank. He had never hidden his work from her. He had never thought it needed to be hidden. It was part of who he was. But the way she said it, like it was something shameful, something to be kept in the dark, made his chest ache. Her words were a quiet betrayal, one he hadn't seen coming. Before he could even process the depth of what she had said, she continued, her voice colder now, sharper. "I'll tell everyone you're dead," she said, her gaze not meeting his. "Don't contact me again." Dead, dead. Lucas stood there, paralyzed, his mind racing. His wife, the woman he had spent years building a life with, was telling him she wanted him erased from her story. His existence, his very being, no longer mattered. It was as though he were nothing. She didn't even look at him. She turned away, arms crossed, her back to him, like he was already gone. It was then that the finality of it hit him. Lucas didn't scream. He didn't beg. He simply stood there, feeling every ounce of dignity he had worked so hard to preserve drain away. The silence between them was suffocating, unbearable. The marriage he had once believed was solid was crumbling, and all because he wasn't good enough for her sister's perfect wedding. Without a word, without a fight, he walked to their bedroom. He pulled out an old duffel bag from the closet, his fingers numb as he shoved clothes inside, his boots, his flannel shirts, even the socks with holes in them he had never bothered to throw out. All of it went in. Every item felt heavier than it should have, as if he wasn't just packing up belongings, but himself, his life, his future. The weight of it all crushed him. She didn't stop him. She didn't say a word. And when the bag was packed, when the door clicked shut behind him, Lucas knew his life had been irrevocably changed. He was a broken man, not because of the loss of Camila, but because of the loss of something he didn't even know he had been holding on to. Her respect. The cool night air hit Lucas's face as he stepped out into the streets of San Francisco. The city was alive, bustling around him. But he felt disconnected, as if the world had moved on without him. His phone stayed silent in his pocket. No calls, no texts. He wasn't even sure why he still carried it. Camila had erased him from her life. And now, in the silence, he was left to face the weight of that loss. Without a plan, without any real direction. He wandered, eventually finding himself at a cheap motel a few blocks away. The room was small, the bed lumpy, the smell of stale cigarette smoke and bleach hanging in the air. It was nothing like the life he had imagined for himself. Nothing like the future he had once thought was certain. But in this moment, it was all he had. And so, he threw himself into his work. The building he had once worked in. The one that had seemed so distant and important to him when he was cleaning its floors, became his refuge. The daily grind was now his escape. His job, which had once been just a means to an end, became his only source of pride. The work was repetitive, but it was something he could control. It kept him grounded. Lucas's crew, Omar, Tony, and Elena, noticed his change in demeanor. He wasn't the same guy who cracked jokes or kept things light anymore. He had become quieter, more focused. His hands moved faster than his mouth. And Omar, who usually had a sharp word for everyone, raised an eyebrow one morning as they mopped together. But no one asked him what was wrong. They didn't need to. They knew. It was while checking supplies one morning, up on the 20th floor, that Lucas's life would shift again. He was inspecting the supply closet when he heard heavy, deliberate footsteps behind him. He turned, expecting a colleague, but instead found himself face to face with Benjamin Lancaster, the CEO of Lancaster Holdings. Lucas had seen Lancaster before, striding through the lobby in his sharp suits, surrounded by people who seemed to move out of his way, but they had never spoken. The man was a giant in the world of business, owning half the city. But today, Lancaster's eyes focused on Lucas, and for a moment, Lucas felt like he had been transported into a different world altogether. "You must bow the head of cleaning here," Lancaster said, his voice deep and measured. Lucas straightened instinctively, wiping his hands on his pants. "Yes, sir, that's me." Lancaster studied him for a moment, then, to Lucas's surprise, offered a small smile. "Honest work is the foundation of any great business," he said, his tone steady. No hint of judgment. "My father started as a janitor before he built this empire. Never forgot where he came from." Lucas blinked, stunned. The CEO's father had started out as a janitor, the very man who owned the building he worked in, the one who was admired by the corporate world. His success had begun with the very same work Lucas did. The recognition, unexpected and simple, struck Lucas harder than anything Camila had ever said. "I've heard good things about you," Lancaster continued, adjusting his cufflinks. "Keep it up." Lucas could only nod, his throat tight. Lancaster's words had struck a chord deep inside him. For the first time in a long while, Lucas felt seen, not just as a worker, not just as a cleaner, but as someone who had worth. And it was in that moment that something shifted inside him. As Lucas walked back to his duties, the world around him felt different. The building, the floors, the shining windows, everything was his, and for the first time since Camila's betrayal, he felt like it might just be enough. He was enough. Days turned into weeks, and life moved on. Or at least it seemed to. Lucas kept his head down, focusing on his work, letting the rhythm of the building's operations drown out the noise of everything else. The daily tasks, mopping the floors, scrubbing the windows, managing the supply closet, became his sanctuary. He didn't need much. He had his crew, his job, and a semblance of respect that he had never thought possible before. He was no longer just the cleaner in the eyes of Benjamin Lancaster or anyone who worked in the building. He had a sense of pride in his work now. But despite the small victories, the nagging emptiness inside of him would not go away. The ache from losing Camila, the woman who had been his partner, his confidant, still lingered. And then, one day, while working late in the conference hall, Lucas overheard something that stopped him cold. As he wiped down an already polished oak table, he heard voices in the hallway. It was Benjamin Lancaster, the man who had unexpectedly recognized his worth, talking with his son Grayson, who was about to marry Melanie, Camila's sister. The conversation was light at first, but then Lucas caught something that made his heart drop. Melanie's sister lost her husband years ago, Benjamin said, his voice thoughtful. Tragic thing! Lucas froze, his hands gripping the rag so tightly. His knuckles went white. His breath caught in his throat. Melanie's sister, he knew who they were talking about. They were talking about him. Or at least the version of him that Camila had created in her world. Grayson's voice came next, calm and certain. Yeah, Melanie told me her sister's husband died in a car accident 10 years ago. Lucas's world tilted. A car accident. That was the story Camila had spun. Her way of erasing him from her life. A story she had shared with everyone, including her family. The lie had become so deeply entrenched that even the Lancaster family had bought it. The weight of it all crashed down on Lucas. The life he had shared with Camila, the love they had built, had been erased and replaced with a lie that he had never even known about until now. He stood there, paralyzed, the rag in his hand limp. The pain in his chest was raw. But there was also something else. Anger. Anger at the betrayal, at the woman who had once vowed to love him, yet had created a story that painted him as dead in the eyes of her family. But Lucas wasn't going to let this go. He wasn't going to stand idly by while the world believed that lie. The truth, in all its rawness, needed to be told. For the first time in a long while, Lucas felt a sense of clarity. This wasn't just about a broken marriage. This was about him reclaiming his dignity. That night, as he walked back to the motel, his steps felt heavier. He knew what he had to do. And the thought of confronting Camila filled him with a sense of determination. The lies she had woven would no longer hold power over him. It was time to set the record straight. Lucas didn't expect it, but Camila called him the next morning. Her name flashed across the screen of his phone, and for a moment he debated ignoring it. What was the point of talking to her now, after everything she had done, after the way she had erased him from her life? Did he owe her anything? But something inside him, a part of him that couldn't entirely shake off the years of love they had shared, made him pick up the phone. Lucas. Camila's voice was shaky, desperate, almost broken. Please, I need you. Please come to the wedding. Everything's falling apart. He could hear her crying, and for a moment it almost felt like she was the woman he had once known. But then he remembered the lies, the betrayal, the way she had pushed him out of her life, as though he never mattered. I don't understand, Lucas replied, his voice steady but cold. You said I was dead. You said never to contact you again. Her voice cracked, full of panic now. I didn't mean it, Lucas. I never meant it. Please, you have to come. Everything is falling apart. The sound of her voice, small, vulnerable, tugged at something deep inside him, something he thought he had buried. He wanted to tell her no. He wanted to walk away and leave her, to deal with the consequences of her own actions. But there was something in the desperation, something in the way she begged, that made him hesitate. The wedding was at the Fairmont Hotel. It wasn't far, just a short cab ride. But Lucas didn't know if he could trust himself to go. What could he possibly offer now? What could he say that would fix what she had broken? Despite himself, he agreed. Not for her, he told himself. Not to fix things with her, but to see it with his own eyes. To finally understand what had driven her to destroy their relationship. When he arrived at the font, he could feel the tension in the air. The hotel was grand, elegant, the epitome of wealth and power, the kind of place where someone like Lucas had never felt he belonged. But now, here he was, walking through its marble halls. As he stepped inside, the eyes of the guests turned to him. Whispers rippled through the crowd. He was a ghost, a man who wasn't supposed to be here, a man who had been erased. Then he saw her. Camila rushed toward him, her heels clicking nervously against the floor. Her face, usually pristine and poised, was a mess of tears and smudged mascara. She looked almost unrecognizable, a far cry from the confident woman who had once seemed to have it all. "Lucas," she gasped, grabbing his arm, as if he were her only lifeline. "Thank God you're here." He pulled back, frowning. "What's going on?" Her eyes darted nervously around the room, as if she didn't want anyone to hear. "They know," she whispered. "Benjamin Lancaster knows you're not dead." He confronted Melanie and me. "Grayson is furious. He's talking about calling off the wedding." Lucas stood there, his mind racing. Grayson, Camila's sister's fiancé, was furious, not because of her lies, but because the truth was out. The perfect wedding and the perfect family. Everything was crumbling, and Camila was desperate for him to fix it. Fix it! The audacity! Lucas's blood began to boil, but he kept his cool. He wasn't here to fix her mess. He wasn't here to save her. "So, your lie blew up," he said, his voice flat, emotionless. Camila's hands trembled, but she didn't answer. Instead, she just stared at him, her face contorted with guilt and fear. "Why should I fix it?" Lucas asked, his voice quieter now, but still firm. "You told everyone I was dead. You signed me out of your life." Her face crumpled further. Tears streamed down her cheeks. But Lucas didn't soften. He couldn't. "I was wrong," she whispered, her voice small, fragile. I didn't think you'd matter to me anymore." Lucas's heart felt hollow. "You didn't think I'd matter," he repeated, the words like a slap to his soul. "You didn't think I'd matter after everything we went through, after everything I did for you." Camila didn't answer. Instead, she took a step forward, reaching for him. But he stepped back, his hand on the door to the ballroom. "Live with it," Lucas said, his voice low and steady. "This isn't my fight anymore." And with that, he turned and walked away. The silence in the room pressed against him, but Lucas knew this was the end, not just of the wedding, but of any connection he might have had with her. It was over, for good. As Lucas walked away from the chaos of the wedding, the weight of everything that had happened seemed to finally settle within him. He had told the truth. He had faced Camila and her family, revealed the lies that had been woven about him for years, and walked away unscathed. The wedding was over. The lies were exposed. The world that Camila had built on a foundation of deceit was crumbling. And Lucas, he was free, stepping out of the Fairmont. The cool San Francisco air greeted him like a long-lost friend. The city stretched out before him, vibrant, alive, and full of possibilities. The skyline glittered under the dimming light of the evening. And for the first time in a long while, Lucas felt the ground beneath him, steady and solid. He wasn't the broken man who had walked out of his apartment just weeks ago. He wasn't the ghost of someone's past. He was Lucas Carter, alive, standing on his own 2 feet and ready for whatever came next. Lucas didn't go back to the motel. He didn't even consider it. Instead, he returned to the life he had started to rebuild, one that no longer involved Camila or the lies that had kept him chained to a broken past. He walked with purpose, every step reaffirming the decision he had made to take control of his own story, to stop being a spectator in the life he had once lived. In the weeks that followed, Lucas focused on his work. He didn't need the approval of the elite people who walked through the office building every day. Their opinions didn't matter. What mattered was the recognition he had earned from Benjamin Lancaster, the respect he had gained from his crew, and the pride he felt in doing his job well. The offer from Lancaster to become the head of facilities management was still fresh in his mind, and it didn't take long for Lucas to accept it. The pay was better, the responsibility greater, and most importantly, it was a chance for him to finally prove to himself that he was more than the man Camila had tried to erase. Lucas moved into a small apartment with a view of the bay. It wasn't fancy, but it was his. It was clean, quiet, and it provided him with the space to rebuild his life. One small piece at a time. He had a routine now, one that didn't involve waiting for a call from Camila, or for her to apologize, or for her to come back into his life. He wasn't looking back. He wasn't looking for her. The days went by, each one more solid than the last. His crew, Omar, Tony, and Elena, still worked with him, and they joked about his new position. They teased him about his collared shirt and clipboard. But there was respect in their banter. They were proud of him, even if they didn't always say it. Lucas had earned that respect, and it felt good. One day, as he sat at his desk, signing paperwork and reviewing schedules, he heard the sound of his phone buzzing. He picked it up, expecting another mundane call about a supply issue or a schedule change. But instead, it was a name he hadn't seen in weeks. Camila. His heart skipped a beat. He didn't know what to think. What did she want now? What could she possibly have to say after everything? He debated for a moment, his thumb hovering over the screen. He could ignore it. He could leave her to her mess. But then the phone buzzed again, and this time it was Melanie, Camila's sister. His mind raced. Was it an emergency? Was something wrong? He didn't know. But his curiosity won out. He answered the call. Lucas, please. Melanie's voice was soft, almost apologetic. Camila, she needs to talk to you. Lucas felt the familiar tug of old feelings, the same emotions he had buried so deep when he walked away from their life. But this time, there was no anger. There was no desperation. There was just an overwhelming sense of finality. He had closed that door, and no matter how hard Camila knocked, it wasn't going to open again. She's here, Melanie continued, her voice trembling. She really needs to see you. Lucas let out a slow breath. No, he said quietly. I don't need to see her. She made her choice. Melanie, she's the one who shut me out. There was silence on the other end of the line. Melanie didn't respond, and in that silence, Lucas knew the truth. The truth was that he had moved on. He had built something new for himself. He didn't need closure from Camila. He didn't need her approval. He didn't need her at all. He ended the call, set his phone down, and let the weight of the decision wash over him. This was the final test. Camila wanted to come back, but Lucas knew now that it wasn't about her. It was about him, about his journey, about the life he had created. Lucas didn't think twice. He grabbed his jacket, slung it over his shoulder, and headed out of the office. His steps were confident, steady. He didn't know where he was going, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that he was in control. He was living for himself now, and he wasn't going to let anyone, especially not Camila, take that away from him. As he walked through the streets of San Francisco, the city no longer felt foreign to him. It wasn't the place he had once felt small in. It was home. His home, and for the first time in years, Lucas Carter felt like he belonged. In the distance, the skyline of San Francisco glittered like a promise that he had made to himself to never let go of the man he had become. The past, with its lies and heartbreak, was behind him. The future was wide open, and it was his to shape. The night air felt cooler now, but Lucas didn't mind. He breathed deeply, taking it all in, the city, the freedom, the new life ahead of him. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't looking over his shoulder. He wasn't waiting for a call or for someone to tell him what he was worth. He already knew he was enough.